Hello, welcome back to Crafty Magic Arts. Today we're going to play around with ponies once again. It's been a while since I've worked with these, but my kids really wanted this particular project made, and so I made it. Fact of the matter is, I already have a Spider-Man and Mary Jane Watson pony, so it was only a matter of time until they asked for this pony. Or two ponies. This project is quite the doozy, and it will take a while for me to get through it all, so buckle up and prepare for the ride. First, to start with these two ponies, Caramel Crunch and Skylark. I've had these for quite a while, and I was planning to do other things with them, but yet here they are for this project. And here's the project. I drew out a sketch of Venom and Carnage fighting, intertwined in battle. With inspiration in hand, I move on. I have these ponies ready to go, and it's pretty simple. One's head's already off, and the other one's just a simple pop-off. This is one of those special ponies that you can actually retract their hair, so it makes it a lot harder for customizing. Using the heat gun, you can get the pieces out pretty easily. That is, with an X-Acto knife and pliers on hand. So I got that out, now it's time to do the head. Removing the hair is simple with scissors, but I do need to get the neck piece out. That was using the retractable hair. And much like I did previously, there was cutting, pliers, and likely a heat gun. Now I just need to yoink out those old hair plugs. Also, I'll need to find a way to get rid of that gem. Oh, gone. Just dropped it out. With the other pony all prepped as well, we are able to move on to the next piece. And that is actually prepping the ponies even further. So what we need to do is we actually need to cut the ponies apart in order for them to work for the poses that I have in mind. There is going to be a lot of cutting. This pony's neck shape did need to change, so I'm just going to flatten that out so it's a little easier. I do pull out my trusty cutting board to make sure that everything works well here, and that will be used a lot throughout this project. Now I just need to prep for one of the biggest mistakes I make in this project, using this clay. It seemed like such a good idea at the time. All I wanted to do was fill my pieces in with some simple dollar store clay. I've done it before, but not with this clay. I've used foam clay from the dollar store. Still recommend that. It works well enough. This stuff is awful. I would not recommend it for any project. Seriously. So bad. But yet I still use it, and it is what it is. I'll show you how I fix it later. Now, despite me filling up the head, I do decide that I need to change the ears. The pony's ears are way too happy. I don't want Venom to look too happy, so I chop those off, and then I move on to the mouth. I do want to have a full mouth agape. I want to have the big swirling tongue, big compers, so the pony does need a little bit of a makeover, so fully removing the eyes and then also cutting open the mouth. And it is a matter of just chopping. Now, simply pulling them open is not good enough. I actually have to chop off the whole lower jaw and prep for that. Now moving on to the other pony, I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to chop off the limbs. And then I'm going to plan my pose, make sure I cut off the other limbs, clean up some edges, and then make the mistake of using the same clay. I hadn't learned my lesson yet because the other one hadn't dried yet. I do a lot of this stuff like at the same time, so I'm usually working on both of them at the exact same time. So I don't learn my mistakes until it's far too late. And it is what it is. But here I'm doing the exact same thing. This pony was a lot softer. It was probably because it wasn't meant for the whole hair bajiggy thing, but it worked. Here's how I fix it. My trusty wood glue. As you can see, the pieces are literally crumbling out. It does not hold its form at all, so I do need to glue every single piece into the pony. Usually I use hot glue to fill in the gaps with some foam clay, but I guess this isn't much different. It was just really messy. You can see dust is everywhere. It's crumbling. It was actually falling out. Again, I do not recommend it. I am going to be filling up the rest of the body with aluminum foil. I don't want this to be too heavy, so I am filling it up with aluminum foil and hot glue. And it's looking much better. Now, I do actually have holes in all the clay. You can see it there. That is, for one, to help with the drying process, but also to allow for the bamboo skewers to be acting as bones. I had a hard time saying that word. I continue prepping and putting all the pieces together. I usually did add the skewers additionally into the aluminum foil to make sure that I had additional anchor, and then glued the pieces together with hot glue. I was planning on adding Apoxie Sculpt later, so I wasn't too worried about things holding together. Speak of the devil, here is Apoxie Sculpt. The whole piece is not going to be covered in Apoxie Sculpt, but it will be used to hold all of the different pieces together. The two-part epoxy is then mixed and placed in the seams of the pony. Ooh, that sounds bad when you say it out loud. I know I've sung the praises of Apoxie Sculpt many times, but I will sing it again. It is easily one of the best clays to work with on this type of material, just because it does bond so well. And it is so strong, especially with joints like this. You would never want something that's easily breakable in between joints like that on bamboo skewers. Seriously, why can't I say that word? You want something sturdy and tough and something that will stand the test of time, and Apoxie Sculpt will do that for you. Here I am prepping the head and actually getting the jaw set in. And I do it for both of them. I want to make sure they actually are going to work along with the aluminum foil neck that I've created. So here you can see the heads are together. I do glue the jaw in place and lock it in with some super glue. I did change my approach to super glue. I actually buy these like single-use packs. They actually are used for multiple uses, but still, I find that I waste less, oddly enough, because I don't have to wait till the end of the bottle for it to just go hard and then get thrown away. Here I am prepping for Carnage's axe. Yes, you heard that. Carnage is going to have an axe hand. Hoof? Axe hoof? This in which was actually suggested by my older son, who actively adores Venom and Carnage, and I needed to incorporate it into the design. As you can see, I did cut the axe in half and slip in a little drinking straw. That is so we'll be able to slip right onto the bamboo skewer. Bane of my existence, that word, I swear. But here you can see it actually works and it fits, and there will be changes to make it actually look like a more cohesive design, but they'll come later. Let's make the axe now. I am switching over to my trusty Hearty Clay. I had a little bit extra for my last project, so I used it. I do really love this clay, and I did buy more, but it actually, more didn't arrive in time, so I actually switched over to different clay later. Here I'm prepping the wire for the fixing of the axe arm, and I drill a hole into where the bamboo skewer used to be. I'm getting better, and then put the wire in there. Here you can see a simulated battles taking place. But with the wire far too long, I trim it off and get it ready for actually the length it needs to be to hold the axe. That's better. Looking good. Now, magically you'll see there's a ton more Apoxie Sculpt on this piece, and that is working, but I need to move on. Here I am moving back into Hearty Clay. Now, why I'm not continuing with Apoxie Sculpt all over the piece, there's actually a few good reasons, but the main one is the fact that it actually is very challenging to sand. I wanted to make sure that I was able to get the designs I wanted without having to break my back having to sculpt. So I switched over to Hearty Clay for some of the more intricate designs when it came to around the mouth and everything else. This clay air dries and it's light as a cloud, which helps the piece from getting too heavy. Using my fancy little jig, I'm able to hold my pieces without them falling over, which is nice. And here I am adding on more of the Hearty Clay, and you can see I'm actually getting the side of the mouth made. So I wanted to make sure that I had a good scowl, and you can see the side of the mouth where like the cheeks are kind of separated. And then also I want to extend the ears. Now the ears are interesting because I wanted to kind of incorporate them into the design of the eyes. As weird as that sounds, it does end up working. And then I move on to getting other features done. I want to make the feet really pointy and make sure they actually look like you know how Venom has like an elongated fingers. Obviously they don't have fingers, they have hooves, so that was kind of just a way to actually make it work. And you can see me doing that here on Carnage as well. No, this is Venom. The other one's Carnage. They get mixed up a lot in the early days, but I get them sorted in the end. So here, more and more Hearty Clay is getting added, and it's looking really good. Now, I ran out of Hearty Clay, time to move on to DOS Clay. These things are just an amalgamation of all the clays I happen to have at home at the time. There will be more later, you'll see. As you can see here, I'm using the DOS Clay. I really hate the texture it leaves on my hands, but I did discover if I put on gloves, I don't hate it as much. In fact, this clay is excellent and worked really well for this purpose. In fact, I would argue better than Hearty Clay because it sands better. Hearty Clay is a foam clay, so it doesn't sand quite as nicely, whereas DOS Clay does dry very nicely and can be sanded like silky smooth without leaving any kind of marks or residue behind if you have the right sanding gear. These ponies are constantly being worked on at the same time, and then they regularly battle, so they're looking good. Toothless, they're looking good. And here you can see more DOS clay has been added off screen, and that is just because it was a lot easier than trying to make it all come to life in front of your eyes. It would take forever. But you can see here that the pieces are looking really, really good, and they're looking smoother. The axe is fitting nicely and the arms are created, but here I am sanding, and you can see it works really well. I do actually bring them into my sanding thing that I made, which is like a bag, but I don't really need to show that here either. I do recommend you wear protection whenever you are using any kind of sanding gear, because you want to make sure you don't breathe that stuff in. Now we're finally securing the axe. This was done purposely very late in the process, just so I could make sure that everything else was looking good and I didn't run the risk of breaking it. Hot tip, water is your best friend when working with DOS clay. It helps adhere and it helps smooth it out. Next we're going to jump to working on my first couple teeth attempts. This is the first one, which is toothpicks. I actually cut off the sharp bits of toothpicks and then I shoved them into the gums that you can see here. And it looked ridiculous. So bad I scrapped it. Pull that out and noped right out there. Then I try these plastic teeth I cut out and I thought, oh, these will look good, but how will I make them stick? I know, I'll shove clay in the mouth. Now, first, before I jump to the plastic, I actually think, well, if the clay's already in there, I'll just sculpt them. So I actually scratch the teeth in, and then once again, I am just gonna nope on out there and just rub that off. And now we're trying my plastic teeth attempt. And despite it looking okay, I nope with this one as well, because I realize I cannot fit the tongue in there. So now I am pretty sick of those teeth, so I decide to try my hand at something else. I bring out my polymer clay and make my own. So then I painstakingly rolled out more teeth using polymer clay, and believe me, it was painstaking because that clay was like 5 years old and needed a lot of conditioning. But with the teeth done and baked, I'm able to once again attempt to put my teeth in, and oh my gosh, it looks worse, and I just nope right out of there. So I literally stopped working on the teeth because they're so frustrating and I need to move on to something else. I have the clay rolled out. I figure I'll make the tongues. So here I am busting out some wire, and I've cut them up into the size that I believe I'll need for the tongue. I do want to measure them, so I shove them into the back of the mouth. It's still foam clay in the back there, so it's really easy to do. And I'm able to get a good gauge of how deep I want the wire to go. And then I do the same thing for Carnage. Carnage is going to have a shorter tongue because Venom's kind of the one more known for his tongue. And then I wrap it in smaller wire because that's a good way to make sure your clay actually stays on the wire. And I do the same for Carnage's tongue as well. Once again, please don't listen to these things out of context. And here I am sculpting the tongue directly onto the wire, and it's really working well. It's got the shape I want, and it fits really well into the piece, and I'm very pleased. Carnage's tongue gets the same treatment. So now it's time to work on the veins. If you look at any of the Venom pictures, you'll notice that they are very veiny. Now, I don't follow any kind of reference, but I do want to make sure that those bumps are present, so I actually use twine. This twine is actually very special. My youngest son decided to get me this for Christmas. It was because he knew I was crafty, and he wanted to make sure that I had something that I love, and I do. I use it on my Venom here. In fact, I use it for both. It looks really good and it worked really well. It was very time consuming, and once again the wood glue came and saved the day. Next, I want those little vein things I created to be not so pronounced, so I'm actually rubbing the dust clay all over the body here, and I'm also using my X-Acto knife to kind of carve off any pieces that are a little too extreme. I want to do this for both of them, and a simple little transition will make it happen. Looking really good. So now I need to move on to mixing up my favorite gesso and Mod Podge. This is something that I got from Black Magic Craft. although it's slightly adjusted because I used gesso instead of just regular craft paint. And here they are fully covered, and I have paint all over my fingers. Thank goodness I am wearing gloves this time. Moving on to a little bit of a scene change, I'm actually going to start working on the background. Pulling out this frame, this actually comes from my Oma's old sewing box. It was falling apart and I needed the pieces, and I decided to make it into something new and unique. I know my Oma would approve. With the side pieces of the box now making the bottom of my frame, I'm able to now add some wood glue to my piece and add some scrap wood to make an extended bottom to the frame for Venom and Carnage to sit in. I will need a strong bond, so I am using more of the wood glue, and I'm now sticking together some clamps I actually got from the dollar store and some bow clips I just happen to have in my collection of stuff. This is just to make sure the glue actually glues together. Here you can see kind of what I'm planning, and it's looking mighty nice. I will need to make sure that the ponies actually are able to stand in this piece, so here I am drilling holes directly into them and prepping some dowels for them to stand on. Then I drill some holes directly into the piece in preparation for a placement for the dowel. So I actually need to make sure that I'm able to screw the dowels in, because simply just placing them in won't be strong enough, so I screw them in, adding a dollop of wood glue for good measure. Now the backdrop's going to be put aside for quite a while now while I work on the painting of this piece. First I paint inside the mouth to make sure I get some color in there. I want to make sure that is somewhat colored before I put in the tongue. I don't want the tongue put in and then we have to try to like paint around it. That would just be a nightmare. Straight up a nightmare. It is also why I'm painting the tongue at this exact moment. I want to make sure that I've got this fully painted before it goes into the mouth. Completing Venom's tongue first, I now move on to Carnage's. Much smaller, but still gets the point across. And now I need to make sure they're actually adhered inside the mouth. I'm using some cheap dollar store glue. Nope, don't use this glue. It's terrible. Invest in the good stuff. It's like a yellowy color and it doesn't work as well. There's always going to be times when you can cut the corners on some things. Moving forward, glue is not going to be one of those things. I'm going to cut corners on. Paints, I'll get dollar store paints every now and then, but yeah. Now I'm going to move on to some glossy Mod Podge to make sure the mouth is nice and wet. That's a disgusting sounding thing, but yeah. Here I'm stippling on the glue to give the illusion of taste buds. It actually does work, so it gives it a nice bumpy texture. And now, with much failure with teeth, I finally figured out how I'm going to do it. I'm going to glue in the plastic shards. Everyone cheer. Thank you, thank you. But in all seriousness, this actually took a really long time to figure out, and I love how it turned out. But with the teeth, there now needs gums, so here I'm using that foam clay and just shoving it beneath the teeth to make it look more natural. You don't need foam clay, but this is just what I had on hand, and I figured it was a good use of it. Now to actually make sure the gums don't look like they're protruding from the mouth, I actually have to make lips, and I'm also adding a little bit more onto the ear. Next is Carnage's turn. He gets the same treatment with the teeth being added one at a time, slowly but surely. And then here they are fully in the mouth. A nice protruding tooth there, and next is the gums. Adding in the clay in a similar manner and making sure I sculpt those gums nice and proper. And then I want to build up the lips here as well. Both of the faces needed to look like they were snarling, and I added a little bit more length onto the ears here as well. Happy with that, I'm moving on to the next thing for the base. I need to make some goo. If you've ever seen anything with Venom and Carnage, you know the symbiote always comes off of their bodies a little bit, almost using them as weapons or ways to connect buildings. Venom simulates webs like Spider-Man, so I need to make sure that's actually something I can show here. I use hot glue on all of these pieces and recycling a lot of twist ties I just so happened to collect, as well as some wire I got from the Dollar Tree. With those complete, I'm going to move back into painting. I'm covering it with my mixture of gesso and Mod Podge to cover up all the newly sculpted pieces. I want to make sure they're covered as well and have a good seal. This happens to happen for both of them. It's a nice quick process, but very important. And just make things super clear, I go from black to black. Really easy and definitely not confusing at all. Although Carnage was actually easier, not sarcastically easier, but I painted with orange, which is the wrong color, but it was a good base paint. I used the Golden Matte acrylics here, but I do switch over to a craft paint just on top. Using references, I make sure the colors are correct with Carnage and make sure he's fully covered as well. And then I'm actually prepping for my Venom. So Venom, I did notice, actually does have a lot of blue in the reference photos, so I do make sure that I do have that throughout the piece, just so it looks like he's almost shining. And now painting the gums, despite being sculpted as pink, it's the wrong pink, so I am painting it back over with the proper color, which is this beautiful shade of pink, which I realize now is a weird thing to say while painting gums. I'm leaving the gums on both Venom and Carnage here, making sure they are looking great, and then setting them on the base that has progressed off screen. I didn't actually film it all because I couldn't. You'll see more of it later. Now I paint Carnage's veins, much like they appear in the movie. This is different than the comics, although I do a combination. Working with such fine detail, I do have to rely on a lot of different brushes. As you can see here, I actually use a variety of different shapes and sizes, including nail art brushes, which work really well, especially with the fine detail you can see here. Like I mentioned previously, I am combining the movie and the comic book version of Venom, so I have to make sure that I actually put his spider emblem on his chest. This took me a really long time and a lot of close viewing inspection that I didn't get the most clear footage, but you can see it's there. Next, I'm going to add the eyes. I use a pencil to draw it out, including watercolor pencil, and then paint it in with this awesome brush. Now, one thing that is fun to see here is that I actually do utilize the shape of the ear to kind of extend the eye. While that's really weird in thought, it's cool in practice. I even give him little Venom nostrils. Adding a little bit of shadow into the eyes to make them have a little bit more depth. Then I add a little bit of white to the teeth to make them, well, white. Next, Carnage gets a similar treatment, except for his veins are going to be painted with the blacky red color that I mixed up here. I didn't have a detail shot, so just a quick zoom in. And now it's time for the eyes. I am doing the same thing, using watercolor pencil and then filling it in with white paint. And it's a lot more jagged of a shape than the one that I found Venom had. I think it's because Carnage is just so chaotic. Making some nostrils, which isn't on, of course, the reference material. I do that because these are ponies, and then I also do the teeth white here. And here's Carnage looking mighty carnagey. To give a bit more depth, I do add a little bit of a lighter color in between all the veins, and that just makes it pop a little better. And then, of course, I have to do some touch-ups around the gums. Now it's time for me to just dry brush some dark colors onto the veins. I found the veins to be a little bit too intrusive, so the dry brush just mutes it a little. Next, time for some detail work. I first take out my watercolor pencils and I add some detail using them. They add some good defined lines and some needed pops of color. I also use my chalk pastels here to add more depth into the gums and in other areas of the pony. I usually like to shave them first on my sandpaper and then apply them with a brush. Going back and forth between the two, I am getting the gradients I'd like to see, especially in the eyes and in the gums. So a lot of work that happens in the gums to make them look a little bit more realistic. And same thing with Venom here, he gets the same treatment in the eyes. I want to make sure they have a little bit more of a gradient of gray rather than a harsh line like I did earlier. Now we're going back to the base. You'll be able to see that I do show actually adding on some of the cardboard here. I want to make sure that the wood is covered, so I'm actually using acetone glue to adhere the paperboard that I've cut up here, and then I'm covering it with all my paint bottles to make sure it's weighed down nicely. And while that is thoroughly drying, I'm moving on to the next piece, which is bricks. A lot of bricks. I cut it up using some scrap cardboard, and then I am going to make sure they are all the correct size here. I do measure kind of the size I'd like. I am using the ruler as a guide, but I create a lot. I just go for it. Next, I do some very pointless texturing. I find this doesn't do a lot, but I use a rock to make sure that I am adding texture and then cleaning up any additional areas and corners off of the pieces as I'm going. Very slow, very tedious process. While it's not particularly necessary, it does help. So here is all of the pieces I've created. You can see they have nice rounded corners and a tiny bit of texture and all of the garbage that I got off of those. Next, you can see that I have a ton of these already prepped with texture paste, but I actually use my texture paste, or it's wood filler. There you go. It's wood filler. I use wood filler in here to make sure that I'm actually filling up the brick's edges to make sure you can't see the corrugated cardboardness of this. Wow, that was hard to say. But this is a really good method if you're looking for something to do on multiple weekends. Here they are all complete and dry, but I now need to paint them. I am sealing them first before applying them to the background because I want to make sure that they are fully sealed before attached, and I do this to both sides. Just to make sure my fingers don't get too messy, I do take it one step at a time, and it again is a very slow process because I made a lot of bricks. Like a lot. Here's a ton of them, and I'm still not even halfway through. Ah, here we go. Magic editing, and they're all done. Now you're probably wondering, what were the bricks all about? We thought we were working on Venom and Carnage. Well, I'm about to show you. I have a backdrop. I have this cardboard piece that I've put together to make sure it fits the background of my frame that you saw earlier, and this is what I'm doing. I'm going to make a backdrop of buildings. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, and I hummed and I hawed, and after consulting my husband, we both agreed that, yeah, the building would be nice, but of course I am extra and I don't do anything halfway. So I make the building actually be a little bit 3D. This is not just going to be painted, it's going to be 3D. So with a combination of my paperboard and my foam board and a bunch of stir sticks and other dowels that I happen to have on hand, including bamboo skewers. I haven't gotten better there. And I'm able to put it all together to create what you see here. I'm trying to make it look a little bit more like industrial. I did look at references online for some buildings like what are in New York. The tops of buildings especially, and they're all really beautiful actually. I don't know, I've never really looked that closely. But yeah, here they are sealed in, and now we are going to move on to the next piece, which is actually going to be adding the bricks. Taking that wood filler, some sand, and some Mod Podge, we are able to actually get the look we're going for, which is almost like mortar, right? So it's kind of like a makeshift mortar to make sure the pieces kind of look bricky. You don't really see it, but I guess it works. After much time, I am able to call it good. You can see here I have the bricks on the one side, as well as I actually could put the bricks on the other side as well, to mimic two buildings actually. Here I am trimming off all the extra brick. I made sure it overhang, and then I just used a big box cutter to get rid of that. Now I did have some gaps, and I actually do fill them using almost like a grout, if you will, and then I wiped it off with my baby wipes. And now I'm adding more glue and paint. I do use gray this time because I actually don't want to have to bother too much about the coloring later. This is intentional because I want the color that way, although the other building's going to be a different color. Time for the actual background. I am adding black because I intended to be a night sky. You did see that I did draw on a moon. I did intentionally make a sliver of a moon. That changes, but it looks really good. And here I am adding more color. I am using references of a city skyline, and black is not really what the sky looks like, especially in the city. It does kind of glow. So you have a purple to blue to black, and I make sure it all looks good there. Now it's time for me to actually paint the mortar of the gray building. You can see here that I'm using a nice light gray that I've pre-mixed, and I'm going between all of the bricks. And then using my nice square brush here, I'm going to add variants of color. It is gray, but it's not the gray I want. I want a variety of grays throughout. So you can see I'm painting them strewn about, different bricks, different colors. I think I have 5 colors made up, and here's what it looks like when it's done. Next, I need to move on to the side building. Now this is intentional, so you can actually see that this side is more of a regular colored brick, like a red brick. Now I make sure this is on the side with Venom, who is black, and then I do the gray brick more on the side with Carnage. I had to do gray because Carnage would have blended right into the red brick. So that's actually why the main building is gray. Now I'm going to do a wash. I'm using a makeup sponge just to dab up the extra. It does help and make it look a little bit more organic. So I don't take it all away, just a little bit. And then I use the same wash on the red side as well. I want to make sure it looks a little dirty, but not too dirty. Now, to make sure I don't ruin all my hard work, I am covering up each of the pieces because I want to prep for the starry night sky, which I'm making using the flicking method. Dang, I make a mess. It's okay. It's easy to clean up, and then I proceed after I get all the little stars on, I make them larger using my paintbrush. And then I also work on the moon and make sure it is moon colored, so not just plain white, but also has little bits of gray in there, so it looks like a nice bright moon. Not the sliver I intended, because that just fell through, but it looks great. At this point, the bricks were looking a little dark, so I actually did some dry brushing to call out all the edges and all the texture that I previously made. Now it's time for going back to the frame. It's been a hot minute since we've looked at this, but I need to make sure it's ready to go as well, using up the mixture of gesso and black all over the frame, including the bottom. And the same gesso and black for all of these symbiote goo things that I've put together. I do paint them all. I don't end up using all of them, but I want to make sure they're ready to go, and because I don't really know how they're going to look in the piece yet. Once I kind of have an idea, I do begin to paint them the colors of their respective ponies. So here is a Venom one, and then here is a Carnage one. Carnage does need multiple layers of red to make it look correct, and I mixed up the red to make it look as close as possible. And then I make sure they are shiny. I want them to look gooey, slimy even. So I just glob it on there. Now be careful with this kind of stuff. Don't glob it on too much. Make sure you spread it out because it will dry cloudy. Using the same gloss Mod Podge, I do the same with the eyes. I want them to be shiny, but then I also do the feet. Now this does seem a little weird at first, but you have to think that the goo or the symbiote goo is coming out of their bodies. So I want to make sure it doesn't look so starkly different to the pony. And then I decide that the veins all need the same treatment. So they're going to be shiny throughout. Not the whole thing is going to be shiny. You're going to have patches of shine and patches of not shine. Yeah, I also want to make sure their mouth looks super wet. Again, really gross to say out loud, but it's got drool and it's like, it's wet. So Carnage gets the same thing, and he gets the feet as well as the veins. And I even do the axe, especially I get a nice shine right on the edge there to make sure it looks like it's sharp. Little delicate strokes here and there. It's not really concentrated planning, it's more just going with the gut feel, but I am going with the veins as well as any areas I feel that just need to be glossy. It's really just go with your heart's desire when it comes to painting Venom and Carnage, apparently. Who knew? But I'm really happy that I did that, because you can see here that it's really nice and glossy. But to add to the gloss, I am adding some UV resin. I actually put this into the mouth on purpose to A, look like kind of slimy, but B, it's really strong and I don't want the teeth to fall out. So I'm making sure I do it for both of them. It's a big globs are put all over the mouth, bottom and top, and then sealed in with UV with the UV light. I do add this all over the tongues as well to make sure they're really slimy. I don't capture it on film, but I actually add drips of UV resin coming from the tongue. It works out really well, but you'll see it in the final piece when it's all done. But here you can actually see me adding it to the top of the tongue. Now it's time to paint with my brand new, shiny, black 3.0. I got it for Christmas, and I have been waiting so long for the perfect thing. And I wanted to make sure this backdrop was as black as can be. So I wanted to first paint it black, and then I painted it black again, black 3.0. And yeah, now it's time to actually add on the pony. Finally, we're here. We're at a point where they're actually all coming together. You can see that I have Venom and Carnage in their respective locations. And now I'm adding on the symbiote goo things that I made previously. I want to make sure that they're kind of intertwined, that they're actually enveloped in one another. So some of the symbiotes actually wrap around each other. And so here you can see that Venom is squirting out kind of a web-like texture and wrapping around Carnage's foot. And then also Venom is connecting to the wall, and so is Carnage. Carnage is a lot more chaotic. He doesn't have any like purpose for what he does, whereas if you look at Venom's, it looks a little bit more purposeful. Carnage has ones that are just coming out of his back. and Venom has ones that are coming towards Carnage, whereas, I don't know, it feels more accurate to the characters. Now, while I'm sure I could show you an hour or two of me sticking these little tendrils onto the piece, I am going to call it good here. Let's move on to the final shots. Carnage and Venom and Carnage, all done and complete. And now it's done. Here is Venom and Carnage in all their glory. Now, one thing that's really important to know about this project was it was really hard. Venom and Carnage are such well-known characters that when I was actually going about making this, I was stressed that I wouldn't do them justice, especially when it came to the teeth. Like, the teeth is such a big part of their character design, as well as like the symbiote and all that stuff. So I had to make sure that while these were completely unique designs, because they're ponies, they were actually taking into the account of the original designs, especially because I was, for Venom, doing both the movie and comic book versions. It was really stressful, and while I did not quit, I definitely walked away a number of times. Like, I was like, I gotta take a break, I can't do this right now, because I was so worried about how the design was looking. As you saw, the teeth attempts were probably the biggest thing, like the biggest deterrent of what I needed to do, as well as the background. I didn't know what I wanted to do. But big shout out to my husband and kids who kept cheering me on. It makes a big difference when you have support and people that are like excited for what you're making, always saying you're doing a great job, keep going. So thank you so much to my wonderful children who also supplied some of the crafting material and some of the design concepts. But yeah, I'm really excited how this all came together. I'm hoping you're picking out all the unique things that I did here, like, for example, the symbiote coming out of the back end of the pony to make it or appear like tails, things like that. It was a labor of love, without a doubt, and I really did enjoy making it, although this was definitely one of my biggest challenges in a long time. So be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and don't forget to ring that notification bell. Just continue to grow this channel one subscriber at a time, and I appreciate each and every one of you. So thank you again, and I hope to see you sooner the next one. Bye!